This wild and unpredictable month of December for Mississippi State continues this week as the Bulldogs have had some tragedy within its football program, but also they've been moving forward in a new direction, and in some ways, a lot of the same direction that they were at the end of the season. Of course, earlier this week, as everyone recalls, Mississippi State lost its head coach, Mike Leach, tragically to a heart attack, massive heart attack that ended his life eventually on Monday, I believe, or Tuesday. And it's been a really just a dreadful week for all those in college football mourning the loss of Mike Leach, and also for Mississippi State, who lost a leader. They lost a father figure. And for Mike Leach and his family, of course, his family lost a loved one that will never be replaced. And obviously our thoughts are continuing to be with the Leach family, Sharon and their kids, after the loss of Mike Leach. But this is a show that must go on for Mississippi State. They had to continue to move things forward as far as the program is concerned. You're a week away from signing day, and the Bulldogs had to get everything in order to make sure that this roster stays together, make sure that this recruiting class stays together. And that's the direction that they went with Zach Arnett, defensive coordinator, interim head coach for Mississippi State, when Mike Leach had experienced his health event that he did on Sunday. And after a couple of days following the death of Mike Leach, Mississippi State decided to put the permanent tag of head coach on Zach Arnett. And in this episode of Talkin Dawgs, we're going to discuss a little bit about what that means for Mississippi State, why that was the right decision at this time for the Bulldogs, and the repercussions that's going to come from this for Mississippi State. Mostly what I believe to be positive, especially with the current roster and the current recruiting class and the transfer portal for the Bulldogs. So let's start from the beginning. Of course, on Sunday morning, you had the health event for Mike Leach, where he suffered a massive heart attack, was transported to the University Medical Center in Jackson, eventually was pronounced dead on, I don't know the exact time that happened, but on Tuesday morning we were notified by the family that Mike had passed. And by the way, Mike Leach's memorial service at Mississippi State will take place on Tuesday at 1 p.m., this coming Tuesday, that is. I believe the 19th is the date for that, 1 p.m. inside the Humphrey Coliseum. And expecting a huge crowd for that from people all over the country coming to pay their respects to Mike Leach. Doors open at noon. I encourage everybody to be there relatively early to try to get a seat, because this thing could fill up pretty quickly with the impact that Mike Leach had on college football. But on Sunday morning, Mississippi State interim athletic director Braggy Brett had already announced that Zach Arnett was going to be handling the day-to-day job of being head coach for Mississippi State, leading the team into the bowl game. There was never really any intention for this team to deter away from a bowl game. I don't think Mike Leach would have been on board for that. I think Mike Leach would have wanted this team to fight and to play that ball game, and that's exactly what they're going to do. That's exactly what they plan to do from the start, and they're going to do it with Zach Arnett as the head coach. So after Leach had passed, there was a lot of talk that, the show must go on for Mississippi State. They were going to have to make some decisions. They decided to pause the athletic director search that is ongoing currently. They've already had several interviews, a few of which have been Mississippi State employees or people that were Mississippi State employees. So some familiar faces have interviewed for the job so far, and I expect that process will be winding down relatively soon when they resume it. But they're not going to resume it until after the Christmas holidays, from what I've been told, which probably gives you a timeline of early January for a new athletic director is right now the plan. So with that in mind, Mississippi State doesn't really have the means at this point to go out and hire a new head coach or to start that process. You don't have an athletic director in place. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're leaving a lot of these players in the recruiting class out to dry. They don't know who their head coach is going to be. They can sign and then release themselves from their letter of intent when the new coach is hired, but you would like to have a resolution for those guys so they could find a home if they choose to go somewhere else. You definitely don't want to put them in a situation where they don't have many options when they do have some options before signing day. So the timeline really did not line up to make any sense for Mississippi State to do a long, drawn-out search. You're putting your signing class in jeopardy. You're putting your roster in jeopardy because a lot of players with the loss of several coaches on staff are probably going to leave. And this roster would have been gutted. And that's not the position you want to put yourself in trying to hire a coach because you're going to have a hard time finding a guy that wants to sign up for a total rebuild, and that's what Mississippi State would have been more than likely had you done that. So keeping the continuity together was the most important thing for President Keenum and also for Bracky Brett to try to give these players a sense of stability. Everybody is still here on the MSU's coaching staff with the exception of Mike Leach. Now that's a huge hole that's left with the head coach gone. But all these people have been around these players. They're familiar with these players. All the players are familiar with how everything works. There's not going to be much of a beat missed as far as preparation for this bowl game and all that. So Zach Arnett was the news had surfaced on Wednesday that Arnett was going to get that permanent tag. We had been hearing that was going to be the case throughout the day. It was confirmed by Mississippi State officials on Wednesday afternoon. And on Thursday morning, the university announced that Arnett had signed that deal. 4-year deal, $3 million a year, which is about twice what he was making as a defensive coordinator. It's $2.5, $3 million below what Mike Leach was making, but good salary for a first-time head coach in the SEC, and for Zach Arnett, a guy who has not been a head coach at all, that's a good step up for him. And it also gives you a nice pool for your assistants now. And that's going to be the main thing, I think. The defensive side of the ball should take care of itself. You got a defensive-minded coach. You got the guys in place that have been inside this system. If he chooses to push maybe Matt Brock into that defensive coordinator role, I don't think that there's going to be a huge drop-off there. I think Brock can be able to handle that just fine. So Mississippi State should be fine on the defensive side of the ball. If they choose to add another assistant spot there, they can. There is one assistant position open with the move from Zach Arnett. But I tend to think that might come on the offensive side of the ball. And you can't hold out the possibility for someone not being a part of the staff moving forward. I mean, maybe Zach Arnett wants a completely different offensive staff. Maybe he wants different defensive people as well. I tend to believe that he's probably going to have most of the defensive guys still in place. We'll see how that transpires. I tend to believe there might be a couple of new spots on the offensive side. So the big question over all this on the message boards and social media has been, what does Mississippi State do on offense? Mississippi State's offensive coordinator for the last 3 years has been its head coach. Mike Leach has been the offensive coordinator. He's basically been the quarterback's coach as well. And you've had 2 wide receiver coaches, and this past year, Drew Hollingshead is one of the new wide receiver coaches, and then of course you have Steve Spurrier Jr., who's a wide receiver coach as well on the outside. So those guys have been trading those positions, and then of course you got a running backs coach in Jason Washington. No tight ends on this offense, and the offensive line coach is Mason Miller. So those guys are mostly Leach guys. Jason Washington is a guy that Leach hired at Mississippi State for the defensive side of the ball, so he's not really tied to Mike Leach. But Steve Spurrier Jr., Mason Miller, Eric Mealy, who's the special teams coach, is a Mike Leach guy. and Drew Hollingshead was brought in by Mike Leach as a GA, and Hollingshead was promoted this year. So really intrigued to see what happens there on the offensive side of the ball. I think that Mississippi State's probably going to hire a offensive coordinator to run that offense. The question is, what kind of offense is it going to be, and who is that offensive coordinator, and also what does he do with that offensive staff? Those are the big questions moving forward. I don't think anything's going to happen for Mississippi State on the offensive side of the ball, or really with any of the staff, until after the bowl game. I believe that Mississippi State is going to prepare for this bowl game and keep business as usual with the staff and the players. And then after the bowl game, you're going to see things really pick up in that regard, and they'll get ready for the spring there. So as far as what Mississippi State is getting with Zach Arnett, I think they're getting a guy that just fits Mississippi State. It's really been strange but cool to see. I mean, you're talking about a New Mexico guy. You know, we talked to Chris Jans last night, the Mississippi State basketball coach, who was New Mexico State basketball coach before he got here. And a guy in the press conference, I think, was from New Mexico and had asked him about how different it was in Mississippi. And, you know, Jans had mentioned it couldn't be a much different climate and location than what he had in New Mexico. But, of course, Chris Jans loves it here. And it's kind of the same thing for Zach Arnett. I mean, he's a guy that grew up inside New Mexico, went to the University of New Mexico, played linebacker there. Most of his life, if not all of it, has been spent around the West Coast. He coached at San Diego State for 9 years, played football at New Mexico, and that's just kind of been where he's been all of his life. And then he comes to Mississippi State in 2020. He's been here 3 years, and it's almost like he's been here forever, because he has that mentality that Mississippi people just seem to have. He's got that hard-nosed, blue-collar mentality that has definitely shone bright on the defensive side of the ball for Mississippi State over the years. When you look at some of the great Mississippi State defensive players that are right now playing in the NFL, almost all of them have come from Mississippi. Some of them have come from, you know, surrounding states, so it's not that much different. But you look at those guys, and you look at Chris Jones and Jeffrey Simmons and Darius Slay, who played junior college football in Mississippi, was a 2-star recruit. Preston Smith, who came from Georgia but was a 2-star recruit. Nobody really was looking at him, and he's doing big things in the NFL. You know, Montez Sweat, coming from the state of Georgia, playing junior college football in Mississippi. Just a lot of guys that Willie Gay, a lot of guys that really worked their way up and had that blue-collar mentality, and they come to Mississippi State, they have that hard-nosed mentality, and that's really translated to the NFL as well. And I feel like Zach Arnett has that same mentality that Mississippi State fans and Mississippians as a whole carry. I mean, he is a Mississippi guy. He might not be from here. And I felt the same way about Mike Leach. When he got to Mississippi, it just seemed like he was at home. I don't know what it was about him. That's a guy that came from Cody, Wyoming. And I guess, you know, it's some of the same things in Wyoming and New Mexico. I mean, you're not in the bright lights all the time in those two places. I mean, both of those guys probably came up similarly to a lot of people inside the state of Mississippi. But both of them have loved it here. I mean, Zach Arnett has been rumored for several jobs since he's been here and never truly gone through with it. I know for a fact that he and his family are extremely happy here. I was told earlier this year it was going to take a major job for him to leave as far as a defensive coordinator or becoming a head coach. One of those two things was going to have to happen. I know Auburn was sniffing around him a little bit the last few weeks. That didn't transpire. LSU a couple years ago had talked to him. Texas, he was up for that job at one point, but never left. And he and his wife and his kids, they really love it here in Mississippi. And now he has a chance to make his mark here as the head coach of Mississippi State. And that's a tremendous opportunity for him. And for Mississippi State, I feel like they have the right guy in place for these times. You got a guy that is going to rally the troops. There's been no doubt that since he's been the defensive coordinator for Mississippi State, that unit has played together and played hard for him. And I think that's what you're going to see from the whole roster. I mean, this team might not be any good next year. I don't know. I know that they have a lot of offensive and defensive pieces coming back, and it's setting up nicely for them. Zach Arnett might not be a great head coach. We don't know that. He's never been in this position. But I find it hard to believe that this team is not going to rally around him because he's rallied around them. And humble guy, blue-collar mentality, hard worker, relentless guy. He's going to work his hardest to do what he has to do to make Mississippi State a winner. So it works right now. It's the hire that Mississippi State had to make, I think, in this situation. When you're put in this situation where you're a week away from signing day, you got to hold a roster together, you got to get transfer portal targets in, you have to make sure that you have this continuity going into a bowl game. You don't have an AD. This, to me, was the only play that works for Mississippi State. And, like I said, this might not work out for Mississippi State moving forward. But you know what? I doubt that if Zach Arnett is fired or this doesn't work or whatever, I doubt that the roster would be in any worse shape than it would be had Mississippi State blown things up here and done a full search. So I think this is what you had to do. And time will tell if it is the right decision or not. I agree with it wholeheartedly right now. I'm sure this video could be brought up in a couple years and people talk about how wrong this was, but on paper it's just the right move for Mississippi State. I just don't know if it works any other way. So the Bulldogs are working extremely hard on the recruiting trail. Maddie Dudek is out on the trail with the coaches due to the fact that there's an open spot. There's only a certain amount of coaches that can go out on the road and recruit. I think the 10 assistants and the head coach can go out. But with the loss of Mike Leach, the move up from Zach Arnett, that leaves the spot open, and that means Maddie Dudek has been on the road handling that. And Dudek's perfectly capable to handle that situation. He does Mississippi State's on-campus recruiting. And so Rod Gibson, Kyle Stexnader, those guys, I can't say enough about what they've done. Maddie Dudek, they've done an incredible job under very difficult circumstances to try to keep this thing together. And also the assistant coaches, Zach Arnett as well, they've done a tremendous job because this is not easy. I mean, you're having to relay information to all your players, to all these recruits, while at the same time you're dealing with the grief of losing your boss and a good friend in Mike Leach. So this has been an impossible situation for Mississippi State people to deal with. You got to commend them for doing it, and they're getting ready for a bowl game. So it looks like State's going to come out of this thing stronger. So far, I've not heard of any issues in the recruiting class. One of the few guys that people were worried about going into Thursday was three-star cornerback Kelly Jones from Clarksdale announced he was visiting Ole Miss. Ole Miss just offered him during the Mississippi-Alabama All-Star game practices, and he shut that down on Thursday and said that he would not be visiting Ole Miss. Hasn't commented on his commitment yet, I don't believe, publicly, but I believe Mississippi State coaches had a lot to do with that, and there's a chance that he's on campus at Mississippi State this weekend. So Mississippi State seems to be closing well. They've already gotten 2 transfer portal guys in defensive backs, Radarius Jones and Kamari Rogers. Radar Jones coming from LSU, Rogers coming from Miami. Both of those guys were Mississippi State targets in high school, and both of them chose to go out of state. Mississippi State ends up getting them to campus anyway. So they add some good depth to Mississippi State's cornerback spots, and the Bulldogs have a really good cornerback room coming in with their recruits. Kelly Jones, who could play corner or safety. Then you have Bryce Pollock, who's getting close to becoming a 4-star, former Pittsburgh commitment, nice offer sheet, physical corner. I think he's going to be really good. That's a good get for Darcel McBath. Jalen Abram from Oak Grove, and then you have some of the guys coming back. So Mississippi State's in a good spot with that cornerback room after losing Emmanuel Forbes following the bowl game as he goes to the NFL. You got DeCamerion Richardson back next year. It looks like Asai Spurge probably going to be back. DeCarlos Nicholson and Marcus Banks coming back as well. So State is in good shape. And then Isaac Smith, the 4-star, one of the best players in the state from Itawamba. He was actually on campus last week after taking his official visit the week before. Has an official visit scheduled to LSU this weekend, and that's something that obviously bears watching, and you don't want him to take a visit that late. But right now, I would say Mississippi State's in the driver's seat for him, and he could be kind of the jewel of the class. So that's a big one that Mississippi State needs to get, and I think it helps their chances that they're keeping the staff intact. So a lot of positive news from Mississippi State. They're bringing in a good transfer portal group this weekend as well. And if you want to check out who's coming, Paul Jones is going to have that covered over on 247. Paul will have a list at some point, I would think, this weekend. He is the best of the best in Mississippi State recruiting coverage, so make sure you're tuned in over there for him. And again, I appreciate everybody for always tuning into this and for your thoughts over this last week. It's been tough on all of us. It's been tough on you guys too. I know, losing Coach Leach, that was a tough loss for everybody, especially those that knew him even more than us. So our prayers and thoughts are to those people. Hope to see you guys on Tuesday at the Hump for Mike Leach's memorial service. Should be a touching tribute to him. And also at the Hump coming up this weekend. Tonight, Thursday, as we're recording this, later tonight, Mississippi State women are playing Florida A&M at home, 7 p.m. So come check that out if you can. And then the men will be home this weekend against Nicholls State at 1 p.m. maybe? Could be wrong. Go check that out on hellstate.com. They have the schedule there. But you got to go see the basketball teams this weekend as they get ready to close out their non-conference schedule. So, all right, guys, thanks for tuning in. Just wanted to give you guys a little bit of a talk about what we know and I guess, what this means for Mississippi State with the addition of Zach Arnett as the head coach. And should be an exciting few months for Mississippi State, less than a month away from the bowl game. That should be fun as well. Hope to see you guys in Tampa for that. But other than that, I appreciate you guys, and we will talk to you later.